Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana, your host, and it is very nice to see all of you here with me this evening in real time, and very nice to know that you are there in unreal time if you are joining later. It's very nice to see all of you here, and nice to see the geographical diversity of our group this evening. So thank you very much. It's so nice to see you. And it's so nice to know that you can hear me. Please raise your hand. There's a little hand gizmo. Thank you very much. All right. I feel so much better now. Greetings from freezing, rainy Washington. It's a pretty cold and rainy night here, so I'm very glad to be inside here with you. Let's go through our little checklist of housekeeping just to make sure. So I believe you know that you can adjust your audio settings and your video settings up in the upper right-hand corner. You don't have to worry about your microphone or your camera. You can see and hear me. I cannot see or hear you, but you can pop questions into the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Comments are also welcome. Last week, we began chapter 7, the yoga of knowledge and realized knowledge, jnana and vijnana. So we spoke about the difference between those two. We got the odds of achieving perfection, a complete description of reality in succinct fashion. And we spoke about the 3 phases of material existence and Krishna's role in those phases. We covered verses 1 through 7. This evening, we are going to cover verses 8 through 12 and talk about how to experience the presence of divinity in the material world. We've spoken in the past about how the material world is a transformation of spiritual energy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that this evening. And one of the ways that we re-spiritualize matter is by how we adjust our own vision, which is to say that matter already has an innate spiritual quality. And when we train our eyes to see and to look for the spiritual qualities in material nature, or the spiritual aspect of material nature, the divine nature of the world, and the presence of divinity in the world, then all of that combines together to spiritualize our whole experience and re-spiritualizes our senses and the world around us. That is to say, we see things in their true spiritual nature. So how we see divinity in the world brings up the question of what is the relationship between divinity and the mundane world? This is a question that theologians have been kicking around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The idea, what is God's relationship to the world? So before we get into the verses, I just want to look at this question a little bit and look at how different theologies and non-theologies have looked at this idea, and talk a little bit about how the theology of the Bhagavad-gita, insofar as this question is concerned, is a little different from, in particular, Western theology. So let's come back to sharing my screen with you. This is our classical Western religious conception of God and God's relationship to the world. Here we see God as depicted by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, giving life to Adam. we see God as the creator of the world. And because he is ancient, beyond reckoning, and wise, he is depicted as being both elderly and yet powerful, and all of the accoutrements of wisdom are his. I'm not really sure why he's being carried by his associates, but anyway, I'm sure there's a reason for that. So this is a fairly simple conception. There's God, and God creates the universe, and the universe is outside of God, and God is separate from the creation, distinct from the creation, and perhaps doesn't really get involved in what he has created, or has a somewhat distant relationship to this creation. There's also the Christian idea that in addition to creation, there's also an element of maintenance and transformation. So we also find biblical verses that will speak of God's role in this respect. There's also the idea that God creates the world ex nihilo, meaning out of nothing. There's no raw materials out of which the world comes into being. And this is one way that the theology of the Bhagavad-gita is a little different, in that in the Bhagavad-gita, the idea of and the tradition within which the Bhagavad-gita is nested, the idea of out of nothing is not really accepted. Rather, the creation of the material world comes about as an extension of the energies of the Supreme Being, a transformation of energies into the raw materials of the material world, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance, the three qualities of material nature that in stasis are known as pradhan, the primordial stuff or the primordial potential for the creation of the universe. And by the influence of time and the impact of the living entities who are entering into the material world, the three qualities of material nature that were in stasis and perfect balance are made to move, and therefore thrown out of balance, and gradually the entire cosmic manifestation comes into being, becomes manifest. There's another way of thinking about God's relationship to the world, in that the universe or the world is included within God. So this is the idea that the divine pervades and interpenetrates every part of the universe, and yet is also extended beyond the reach of time and space. This is called panentheism, and is an aspect of what's called process theology, the idea that God is working with us in order to help us actualize our full potential. So this is more of a collaboration. There's also the idea that part of God's relationship to the universe involves voluntary self-limitation. That is to say, God is all-powerful, but he does not exert his full power for the sake of accommodating our free will. Now, this is actually kind of similar. We have also seen in the Bhagavad-gita that we have free will. Krishna does not interfere with our free will. But the reason is a little different. Because in the Bhagavad-gita, we are understanding that we are part of Krishna. And as Krishna has infinite free will. We therefore naturally have infinitesimal free will. So in that sense, there's really no logic in the imposition of God's will on us, aside from the fact that relationships have to be voluntary in order for them to be authentic. There is also this idea that we inherently have free will that Krishna would not interfere with, because our free will is Krishna's free will that we also have. We're going to play or look into a handful of these kind of paradoxes insofar as Krishna's relationship with the world and our relationship with Krishna is concerned. There is also, of course, the idea that it is not so much a matter of what is God's relationship with the world, but what is the world's relationship with God. The atheistic idea that God is an idea, a human or social construct that we needed at some point in time in order to make sense of the world. And maybe now humans are evolving to the point where you don't need this idea of God. So from a secular humanist point of view, that might seem like a valid question. From another point of view, our evolution might be seen as God's evolution. I've also seen theologies that work along those lines. The Bhagavad-gita offers us something different. The idea of a complete absolute truth that there's nothing outside of. And the expansion of the absolute truth into a form, God, that creates the world. In other words, the complete absolute truth has the attribute of being both a person and being not a person. And Krishna identifies himself in the Bhagavad-gita as the personal form of the complete absolute truth. And by virtue of expansion, in order to perform specific tasks, such as creating the material world, we have a form that does that. And then that same person enters into the material world, and that person is the person who contains the entire world. So therefore you have basically a very psychedelic kind of infinite progression. You have the Supreme Being who expands and transforms his own energies from spiritual to material to create the material world, then enters into that material world. But because nothing is outside of that Supreme Person, and that Supreme Person is not dual, there's no difference between the original person and the expansion, even though there is a difference, still everything is contained within that Supreme Person. So the Paramatma, who lives within all of our hearts, is a form of the Supreme Being within which the entirety of creation resides. So it's very comprehensive and very psychedelic. Which brings us to the translations and commentaries for our verses. But before I go any further, I want to know if you have any questions about this sense of the Gita's theology, the idea of God's relationship, or the Supreme Person's relationship with the world, as I've just illustrated it. So if you have any questions or any comments, please go ahead and pop them in the Q&A box. I will keep my eye on that and look for your questions. In the meantime, I will read through this week's verses, and then come back to each one in detail, and we will chant one verse from this collection of verses. So here we go. This is Bhagavad-gita, chapter 7, verse number 8. Krishna is about to speak a few verses to tell us how it is he appears, or in what ways we can recognize him in the world. So verse 8, I am the taste of water, O son of Kunti, the radiance of the moon and the sun, the sacred vibration Om in the Vedas, the sound in space, and valor in men. Text 9. I am also the pure fragrance of the earth and the brilliance in fire. I am the life of all who live, and I am the austerity of all ascetics. Text 10. O son of Pritha, try to understand me as the original seed of all living beings, as the intelligence of the intelligent and the prowess of the powerful. Text 11. O best of the Bharatas, Arjuna, among the strong I am strength that is free from passion and attachment. Within all beings, I am the expression of erotic desire that does not conflict with the principles of religion. Text 12. Indeed, you should know that all states of being, be they illuminative, passionate, or opaque, arise from me alone. Yet I am not influenced by these modes of being, for they are all within me. So, if Krishna had come in this particular time and given an analogy for us to understand, he might very well have said, I am the computer screen behind the graphic. Thank you, Jessica, for that modern take. That is a very nice metaphor for being the resting place of all things, including computer graphics. Similar to the verse we left off with last week, everything rests, where Krishna says, everything rests on me as pearls are strung on a thread. So the visual representations that we see on a computer screen are resting on the screen. So in this way, we can also understand a way to see Krishna even when we're sitting in front of our computers. So Jessica, thank you. So Shanna asks, what are sattvas, rajas, and tamas? Good question. Okay. So in this last verse, I translated those as states of being that are illuminative, passionate, and opaque. So sattva is the quality or mode of goodness, which is characterized by illumination. One under the influence of this particular mode of being would have be distinguished by humility, gentleness, generosity, an interest in acquiring knowledge that is meaningful to the higher purposes of one's life. Rajas is the quality or mode of passion. It is born of hankering, characterized by intense endeavor and attachment to the results of that endeavor. The natural result of this is frustration and suffering. And then tamas darkness, opacity, the mode of or quality of being that is characterized by sloth or torpor, sleep, intoxication, bewilderment, belligerence, the insistence of being right when one is always wrong, misdirected intelligence. So, for example, you can be very intelligent in the mode of ignorance. Someone who is very expert at destruction of one kind or another is someone who is affected, influenced by the mode of ignorance. So it's not the same thing as stupid. So did that answer your question? Yes, okay, very good, thank you. And Anonymous, I see your comment. And the question is, what is better, discussion of philosophy or chanting? Well, discussion of philosophy is chanting in a sense. Later in the Bhagavad-gita, we will find that the characteristics of those who are not just influenced by the quality of goodness, but who are influenced by transcendental goodness, those who are fully situated in spiritual life, are always engaged in enlivening one another by speaking about Krishna. So that can take many forms. When we recite the words Krishna speaks in the Bhagavad-gita, then that is kirtan, that is glorification of the Supreme Person by recitation of the words of the Supreme Person. At the end of the Bhagavad-gita, we'll see that Krishna considers the study of this sacred science to be a form of worshiping him with one's intelligence. And then there is chanting of mantras, the chanting of Krishna's names, the chanting of transcendental sound vibration. And these two things go together because by mantra meditation, one elevates the consciousness and purifies the heart in such a way as to be able to understand the philosophy that we are discussing, to be able to really go deeper into its meaning, and then to be able to act, to be feeling motivated to act on the basis of the philosophy, which further qualifies us by realization to enter even more deeply into the philosophy and the practice. So these are synergistic things. They all go kind of hand in hand. All right, thank you. All right, so let's go back now. Unless somebody has any other question. And if you do, then of course, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A box. I'm very, very happy to see so many questions this evening. We will now go back to the first verse for this evening and take a deeper look. So this is verse number 8 once again. I am the taste of water, O son of Kunti, the radiance of the moon and the sun, the sacred vibration Om in the Vedas, the sound in space, and valor in men. So here, Krishna is beginning to describe how he is the essence of everything, or the essential ingredient of everything. Now, earlier when we spoke about Dharma, one of the definitions of Dharma that we discussed is the essential nature of a thing. The ingredient that makes it what it is. So for example, the dharma of sugar is to be sweet, the dharma of a river is to flow, etc. So where Krishna is going with this is that he is the ultimate dharma and the dharma of everything, the essential ingredient, the thing that you can't take away from that thing and still have it be what it is. So we begin with the taste of water. One of the attributes of water is that it quenches thirst. That attribute of thirst quenching in water, that's Krishna. So every time we take a drink of water, which I should be doing like way more than I do, I have my Ayurvedic drops in my glass of water. I'm supposed to be drinking several glasses of water every day, and I have to force myself to do it. So because I forget, I'm just don't do that very well. And this is now my motivation. I should be drinking water because just by drinking water and experiencing the taste of water, I can remember Krishna. It becomes a spiritual experience, even though its external purpose is just to keep me healthy, to take care of this body. Oh, but wait a minute. What is this body? This body is matter. What is matter? Transformed spiritual energy. Whose energy is it? It's Krishna's energy. Therefore, whose body is this? Well, technically that actually belongs to Krishna. I'm just renting. I'm residing here for the time being. But it doesn't really belong to me, and I've got a responsibility to take care of it. The same way any renter is obliged to take care of their dwelling. So I'm talking myself into drinking more water. Thank you for listening. The radiance of the moon and the sun. So when we look out at the moon, which we can't do tonight because it's a terrible, horrible, ghastly, rotten, rainy night where water is coming out of the sky. Oh, water. I'm the taste of water. So all this rain, cold and miserable though it may be, should still, if we are seeing with spiritual vision, remind us of Krishna. But I digress. When the moon is out, when the clouds have gotten out of the way and we can see the cooling rays of the moon, those cooling rays are also Krishna. And when we are delighted by the sight of the moon, well, we are being delighted by Krishna. And what's really kind of far out about this is that, you know, the moon is giving off reflected light, and I've been watching these videos lately and films lately about the Apollo missions, the missions of flights to the moon. And it's really quite unattractive once you're there. It's just dust, and it's pockmarked with holes from things hitting it because there's no atmosphere on the moon. So if you go there, it's not really like all that an attractive place. In fact, you would wonder, like, why did they even bother to go? Granted, lots of really cool technology sort of trickled down out of what they came up with in order to make a rocket go to the moon. But besides that, there's really not like much there, at least not that anyone with our vision can see. But from down here, it's awesome. The moon is beautiful. And the rays that make the moon beautiful are Krishna. So now we have another way to see Krishna in the world and connect with Krishna through the world. The same thing with the sun. The warming rays of the sun are also there. So when we feel the warm radiance of the sun on our bodies, that's Krishna warming us up. When we see the light of the sun, beautiful sunrises, beautiful sunsets, beautiful sunny days. Well, that beautiful sunshine, that's Krishna. The sacred vibration Om in the Vedas, Krishna will make this point a few times. And here we find a parallel with the Yoga Sutras. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, is identical to the sound vibration Om. And the recommended process of meditation is japa, the repetition of the sound Om and contemplation of its meaning as the sound representation of Ishvara, the Supreme Person. So here, Krishna is saying, well, that's me. You know, I am this topmost sacred sound of Om. And therefore we can understand that Ishvara, which in the Yoga Sutras, is Krishna. In the Bhagavad-gita, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali uses a philosophical name or word to describe the Supreme Person. Here, Krishna personally is saying, nope, that's me. The sound in space. So here, once again, is an essential characteristic of ether, of space. That sound is the essential element. So if you look at, for example, the chakras in yoga, the throat chakra is associated with the element space and the sensation of sound, the experience of sound. So that's the essential element, or the essential thing that ether does, is it carries sound. And then valor in men, when we see someone who is chivalrous, who finds courage, who has the ability to do something. Another way to translate this, or to understand this portion of the text, is simply the ability in mankind, our ability to do anything. Where does that ability come from? What would you call that ability? So Krishna is saying here that in order to accomplish something, you have to have some ability. You have to be bold in order to go forth and make something happen. So that boldness, that valor, that ability to do anything, that's also Krishna. Our next verse. This is verse 9. I am also the pure fragrance of the earth and the brilliance in fire. I am the life of all who live, and I am the austerity of all ascetics. So the pure fragrance of the earth, that is to say, unsullied by human junk. There's also a nice way to see transformations of energy in nature, for example, in the form of a flower. So you have a seed, has no aroma. You put the seed in the earth, which does have an aroma, and that seed, when combined with water, which is, Krishna is present in the water, and sunshine, Krishna is present in the sunshine, will transform into a plant that has a flower on it, like a rose or a magnolia, or, you know, some flower that has a scent. And that scent is one of the many varieties of the fragrance of the earth. The earth and the seed have been, the seed has been transformed by the earth, the water, and the air and the sunshine into this plant that gives forth this fragrance of the earth. the brilliance or the heat in fire. Every time we cook, the heat of the flame that is cooking our food, that's Krishna making it happen. The heat of our digestion when we've already eaten and now our bodies are engaged in another transformation of energies, the transformation of food into nutrition. The fire that makes that happen, also Krishna. I'm the life of all who live. So in yoga, we study prana, the life force, and the control of the breath is what liberates the life force. So pranayama, that follows asana. And that life force is itself Krishna. So this is again, an interesting paradox. If Krishna is the life force of all that lives, then we can understand that we cannot live without Krishna. The mode of goodness is also associated with maintenance. So earlier, when we spoke a little bit about varying theologies, we had this idea, which is also present in biblical teaching, that God's relationship with the world is not just creation, but also of maintenance and transformation. So here we are seeing this idea echoed in the Bhagavad-gita, that the life force, that it makes it possible for us to live in this body, this is Krishna maintaining us. And there are verses in other Upanishads that speak of one eternal conscious being amongst all eternal conscious beings, who is the maintainer of all the others, who's the shelter of all the others. So this is another way of expressing that idea. And then finally in this verse, I am the austerity of all ascetics. So the defining characteristic of a renunciate is tapasya, the voluntary acceptance of simplicity that those who are more attached to material life might consider inconvenient or undesirable. But for one who is renounced, then renunciation is the essential quality, and Krishna is that renunciation. Comment from Shannon. It also reminds me of the way the Holy Spirit was given to the disciples through the breath. I'm not as familiar as I would like to be with this particular teaching, but now you've got me curious. Because even though I'm citing a few examples from biblical teaching, I hardly qualify as a biblical scholar or expert. So if you would be kind enough to point me to where I can find this particular aspect of biblical teaching, I would be very grateful. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it. Okay, it is at the end of the book of John, I think chapter 20, and you'll find the exact passage. All right, well, thank you very much. I'll look forward to hearing that. I am always on the lookout for such parallels, so thank you. All right, text 10. O son of Prita, try to understand me as the original seed of all living beings, as the intelligence of the intelligent, and the prowess of the powerful. So here's a really interesting paradox, because we begin the Bhagavad-gita with the proposition that all living beings are eternal, never come into being, never go out of being, no possibility of ever not existing in the future, no possibility we ever didn't exist in the past. And yet, here Krishna is saying that he is the seed, the origin, the original source of all living beings. So here we are, we're eternal, and yet at the same time, we all come from somewhere. We are timeless, and yet there's a first, there's an original being from whom all other beings come, of which all other beings are a part. This is achintya, inconceivable in Sanskrit, that we can be eternal and yet have a source of our being from which we come. Which brings us to verse 11, and I'm going to go back to sharing the screen, because this is the verse we are going to chant for those of you who are new to the satsang. Every session, every class, we chant the Sanskrit call and response for at least one verse, and I'll briefly go over the diacritical marks that give you cues to the pronunciation of the transliterated Sanskrit, which is Sanskrit written out in the Roman alphabet. So a dot over an M, as in malam, means that you close your lips in front, but also the back of your tongue to the back of the roof of your mouth, so that you make almost a nasally M sound. The bar across the top of a vowel indicates a long and open version of that vowel, as opposed to a short and less open version. The C in transliterated Sanskrit is always a CH sound. If you want an S sound, you get an S. If you want a K sound, you get a K. The C is always used for a CH sound. Each letter is pronounced. So if you see two of the same letter together, like two Ds, you'd actually make sure you hit them both. The dot under an S indicates that it is an SH sound. And an apostrophe between words indicates that a vowel has been dropped, so that the vowel at the end of the first word will just go smoothly right into the next word. It's one of the ways that Sanskrit works to ensure that everything is grammatically correct and poetically correct, and the cadence works according to the number of syllables in the line. So in this case, we have 8 syllables per line, therefore the cadence will be as follows. I'll chant one line, you chant the line back, we'll go through the verse. Here we go. Balam balavatam chaham kama raga vivarjitam dharma viruddha bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshabha. Translation, O best of the Bharatas, Arjuna. Among the strong I am strength that is free from passion and attachment. Within all beings I am the expression of erotic desire that does not conflict with the principles of religion. So this is interesting. In the previous chapter, we heard about the yogi as ascetic who goes off to the forest, turns his back on the world, and controls the mind and strictly controls the senses, and that includes the practice of brahmacharya, or celibacy, no engagement in sex life. And yet here we have Krishna saying that I am sex life, that does not conflict with principles of Dharma. So obviously, this does not preclude the possibility that even our intimate relationships and intimate encounters can actually bring us closer to the Supreme Person, who can actually be a part of our spiritual lives. Now the question is, how? What do we mean by erotic, the expression of erotic desire that does not conflict with the principles of religion? And how is that so? Anyway, how can that be? So let's take a little deeper look at this. First of all, here we are being encouraged to transform our material desires into spiritual desires, to renounce material desires in favor of spiritual desires. Well, sexual desire is the strongest of material desires. It is the topmost sensual desire because it combines every aspect of our senses in the most intense way. Therefore, it is the principle of entanglement in material life and the most difficult thing to renounce. So let's ask the question, well, where does that come from? Where does sexual desire come from? It comes from the same place everything else comes from. It comes from Krishna. Krishna is the source of everything. Everything emanates from Krishna. Therefore, in some form or fashion, whatever erotic impulses we have their origin in Krishna, the seed of all existence. Erotic desires exist, therefore, Krishna is the seed of that. In what way? What you see here in the material world, you're going to see in its pure and original form in Krishna, in spiritual existence. So, how can we live up to this particular kind of expression of erotic desire so that it actually becomes Krishna, as opposed to the fulfillment of lust? Well, let's see how we can do that. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, who are we? If we're going to relate to another person on a very intimate level, first of all, we have to have an understanding of who we are and who they are. And what we know is, I am not this material body, I'm an eternal spiritual being, and I am an infinitesimal part of the supreme being, the ultimate, complete, absolute truth. So just as a spark of a fire has the same qualities of a fire, we also have the same qualities as Krishna, but in a distorted form when we misidentify with matter. So we can think of material sexuality as a distorted reflection of spiritual sexuality. So if we understand that, if we know who we are, and we know we are spiritual beings, then how do we engage in spiritualized sex? Well, brahmacharya is not just absolute celibacy. It is sex life according to the principles of dharma, of religion, that which is in harmony with nature, harmony with the universe, that which brings us into harmony with nature. So, how do we do this? Well, we begin by having this engagement within the context of a relationship that is committed on the basis of something higher than just sex. So it's not something to be taken lightly or frivolously. So that's the first order of business. We know what this is not. It's not casual and recreational dating sex, but sex within the context of a relationship that is about more than just enjoying, using one another to enjoy your senses. It means also that the couple is prepared to take responsibility for the natural outcome of sexual engagement, which is to say, children can happen. And you have to be prepared to accept that natural outcome, because if we are going to act in such a way as to harmonize with cosmic order, then we can't subvert cosmic order for the sake of gratifying our senses. Then it becomes something other than sex according to principles of Dharma. The entire enterprise has to be seen as ultimately intended for the spiritual upliftment of all parties concerned. That is to say, it is kind, it is generous, it is not just a selfish indulgence. This is a situation where we make ourselves really vulnerable to our partners, and they make themselves vulnerable to us. How much more vulnerable can you get? We also have to learn how to make ourselves vulnerable to God. One of the big obstacles to the experience of a relationship with the Supreme Person is fear. When we actually acknowledge the all-powerful nature of God, that can be scary. And to admit to freely be vulnerable and open to someone who has absolute power, well, you know, that may take some practice. And making yourself vulnerable to someone who's not quite that powerful, but who still matters to you, is one way that you can work on that. So if you're seeing an intimate exchange in that context, that can at least be helpful in this regard. And then finally, the objective is to spiritualize everything in our lives. So that includes our intimate relationships. So if you have any questions about that, okay, we have John 20:21-22. Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Very nice. Thank you so much. This not only speaks about how this actually has I'm going to study this a little bit more. Thank you very much. Let me just see if I can copy that. Yes, I can. All right, good. I'm going to look this up and study it a little further. It speaks also of the idea of parampara, of disciplic succession, which we spoke about in the 4th chapter, how transcendental knowledge is transmitted, received originally from the Supreme Person. The Vedas are understood to be the breath of Vishnu, and all knowledge about the spiritual and material world is contained therein. So once again, we have this idea of breath, of knowledge, and realization of that knowledge being carried by breath. And then through a line of disciplic succession, one after another. So here, as the Father sent me, I am sending you. And that's the job of a spiritual master. Cool. Thank you. All right. And then our last verse for this evening, once again, indeed, you should know that all states of being, be they illuminative, passionate, or opaque, otherwise known as in the mode of goodness, in the mode of passion, or in the mode of ignorance, arise from me alone. Yet I am not influenced by these modes of being, for they are all within me. So this brings us back to our illustration from the very beginning of the class. We have the complete absolute truth, the Supreme Person, who is the seed of all existence, The material existence is composed of these three qualities of material nature, and yet they are contained within the Supreme Person, who is not influenced by them as we are. And how we are influenced by them and how difficult it is to overcome that influence is what we're going to speak about next time as we move into our next verses. The bottom line here is that Krishna is the source and substance of everything and is also beyond everything. And that takes us to the conclusion. Question, can you tell me the grammatics of pronunciation as far as the word spelled Krishna? Oh, okay. So if you were to look at Krishna's name in Sanskrit diacritical marks, you would see K-R-S-N-A with dots under the R, S, and N. In which case, technically, rather than Krishna, everything in the front of your mouth, the actual pronunciation would be Krishna. So there's a little flick of your tongue to get the R sound, and the SH is represented by the dot under the S, and the N is a little bit back in your mouth, not right up behind your teeth. So Krishna, as opposed to Krishna, would be how you would pronounce that. Okay. I'm going to share my screen with you again because we're done for this evening. Tonight's program has been Chapter 7, the Yoga of Knowledge and Realization, how to experience the presence of divinity within the material world. We covered 8 through 12. If you have any questions, hey, you've got a few minutes to ask them, so please go ahead and pop a question into the question box. And if you have questions after the fact, please write to me at Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. And, whoop, let me see just what popped in here. It did go fast, didn't it? Thank you very much. And yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. Next week, after 38 classes in a row, we are obliged to take a break because this year, Thanksgiving just happens to fall on a Thursday. Whatever. So I expect that you will be otherwise engaged. I am also obliged to be engaged elsewhere. So we're going to skip a week. The day after Thanksgiving, I want you to remember, is Buy Nothing Day. Don't buy nothing on Buy Nothing Day, the day after Thanksgiving. Hey, speaking of buying something, here's a great thing for you to buy. I've got these meditations, audio recordings of guided meditations on my website, and they are wonderful and make great stocking stuffers. Just don't buy them on Buy Nothing Day. Buy them right now. I have also got on my website scripts for guided meditations. So if you are a yoga teacher and you want to integrate guided meditations into your classes, I have these scripts that you can use to do exactly that. You will find these on my website, Hari-kirtana.com. So please feel free to go there. In 2 weeks, on November 29th, we will resume with verses 13 through 19 of chapter 7. We will take a look at how it is we become deluded, bewildered, confused, and covered over by a divine energy. 4 kinds of people who are averse to saintliness of any kind, and 4 kinds of saintly people. So please join us for that. And that wraps it up for this evening. Any last comments? Oh, Jessica does not have a question, but you're leaving for Baja on Monday. That is awesome. And I will think of you while you are learning how to play the harmonium. And I'm very anxious to hear the results of that. Have a wonderful time at your training. And yes, Buy Nothing Day. Something to celebrate every year. All right. We have reached the end of our allotted time. So thank you all very, very much. It is always a great honor for me to be able to, for me to have you spending your time here with me, and a great pleasure for me to spend my time with you. So thank you all very, very much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday, and I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks.